Hello, everyone. Welcome. Today is Tuesday, April 25th, 2023, and this is the special meeting of the Litchfield Governing Board. I call this meeting to order. The first thing on the agenda is the Pledge of Allegiance. If you could please stand. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Next on the agenda is public opportunity for comment, which we did not get any, so we're just going to move right past that tonight. The next item is going to be our consent agenda. I will go through and see if anyone has any questions or wishes to pull something from that. Ms. Clymer?
I do not.
Mr. Honak?
No, I do not. Thank you.
Mr. Owens?
No, I do not.
Ms. Moran?
No questions.
Okay, then I will entertain a motion.
I move to approve the consent agenda as presented.
I will second.
Having a first and a second, I will go through the vote. Ms. Clymer?
Yay.
Mr. Honak?
Yay.
Mr. Owens?
Yay.
Ms. Moran?
Yay.
I am also a yay. Motion passes. And next, we will move on to our information and discussion section. The first presentation will be from Mr. Vaughn.
Madam President, members of the Governing Board, Superintendent Gunning, colleagues and community, thank you for joining me tonight to discuss the potential need for additional capital support. Tonight, we'll be discussing the need for additional capital funding in various areas of the district and consider if we should call for a bond election at the next regular board meeting on May 9th. Briefly, a bond is a capital funding source available to Arizona school districts, which we access via an election and direct approval from our local taxpayers. If approved, districts work with an investment banker to raise the funds by selling bonds and then levying secondary property taxes to pay the bonds back to investors over a longer period of time. Typically, Arizona school districts utilize bond proceeds as a primary capital funding source for large capital projects that the capital funding we receive from the state is insufficient to cover. As a point of reference in tonight's discussion, the district anticipates receiving approximately $5 million in district additional assistance or capital funding for next school year. Beyond large capital projects, these funds are also used to support instructional aids, software used across the district, and curriculum used in our classrooms. As part of a bond election, the district must prepare a voter information pamphlet. As part of that work, districts are required to provide some categorization on the potential use of bond proceeds. At this time, I'm having us consider the possibility of asking for a $100 million bond broken down into the following categories: $48 million for a new school in the western part of the district, $40 million for school renovations and facility improvements to existing schools, $7 million for safety upgrades. I've structured tonight's discussion around these categories of spending by inviting outside experts to present to the board broken down into various uses of the potential bond. Tonight, we will hear from experts at Stifel, the district's investment bankers, who will go into more detail around how bonds work from a financial perspective, including the potential tax impact of a new bond program. Then we will hear from the experts at Applied Economics, the demographer firm used by the district. They'll walk us through updated enrollment projections and the potential need for additional capacity in a new school in the western part of the district. We will then hear from an expert from Bureau Veritas, who recently conducted a facilities assessment at all district schools to discuss the need for renovations and improvements at existing school sites. We will then round out our night hearing from our Director of School Safety, on some of the safety improvements we would like to make utilizing potential bond proceeds. At our next board meeting, we plan to have a presentation on educational technology and transportation needs that would round out the bond program. At that meeting, we'll also hear from experts at High Grounds who have been conducting polling of our community around the potential bond program so we can gauge the degree of public support. And we will have an agenda item to allow the board the opportunity to call for the election if the board so desires. Similar to our budget discussions, each presenter will take questions at the end of their presentation. That the presenter, myself, and the rest of the team, including our Director of Facilities, Dan Ensign, are available to help answer questions tonight as we move through our topics. However, I'm also happy to answer any questions you might have now before we hand it over to our first guest.
Ms. Clymer, did you have any questions?
Not yet. Thank you.
Mr. Honak?
Where are the, in general terms, the new schools? Are they in like the northwest?
There'll be a slide in the demographer presentation that shows the potential sites. We have 3 plots of land that are already available to us without buying land. There's one in the northwest part of the district. There's one slightly south of that piece of land, and then there's one further south even from there.
And are those plots of lands are in areas that are developing and all that stuff? I think we talked about this a while ago, I remember.
Yes.
So it's just follow up more of the same deal. Cool. And then I'm just a little curious about the 5 million for, well, educational technology and transportation needs. That's 2 different areas. How's that? Or can you just give me a little more insight?
Yeah, so we're hoping to have a more detailed presentation on that at the May 9th meeting, but to give a sneak peek, obviously there's refreshment costs to our 1-to-1 rollout where those Chromebooks after a certain age need to be replaced.
Okay.
The AV technology like projectors and things of that nature that are in classrooms are at an advanced age at this point as well. Those are 2 examples. And then buses, like any other vehicle at a certain point reach age and need to be replaced.
Okay, so it's just sort of updating stuff and
Yes, sir.
thank you. Thank you very much.
Mr. Owens?
No questions.
Ms. Moran?
No questions at this point.
I have no questions, so please continue.
So Brian, if you could join us.
Sorry.
Thank you.
Our next presentation is going to be from Mr. Lundberg. Hold on just 1 second. We're going to make sure we got you on the mic.
Push the green button. Okay, yeah, thank you. Madam President, members of the board, thank you for the opportunity to be before you. Enjoy being back and appreciate the opportunity to work with you on this. I'd like to leave you with a feel for, what are bonds and what are some of the financial characteristics of it and what the tax impact would be for issuing bonds. Some of this will be a repeat of what Mr. Vaughn talked about, but I'll try and go through that. So as mentioned before, we take a look at your existing, the status of your existing bonds or any new bond scenarios. Hopefully it's helpful to go through some of these frequently asked questions. But at any time, if you guys have questions or just want me to stop, please let me know. And so what are school improvement bonds? Basically, they're the bonds that Arizona schools can issue. They're debt obligations, as Mr. Vaughn said. They're sold to investors, and with that money, that's what you guys would use to do the capital projects. They're repaid through principal and interest payments that are supported by the district's secondary tax levy. The interest rates on Arizona school bonds have to be fixed. They're fixed at annual rates, but paid back semi-annually. And the tax rate for the bonds for district property owners is simply the amount that's due that year in P&I payments divided by the net limited assessed value for the district for that year. And then you'll see that the tax rate is in terms of per $100 of this assessed value. Bonds do require voter approval. It's a simple majority, so 50% yes plus one more yes vote. If you are an elementary district, statute says that you can issue up to 10% of your full cash assessed value. That's the unrestricted value. We'll talk about that a little bit later, minus any existing bonds that you have outstanding. However, the amount that you ask for voters is not limited. It's just when you go to sell bonds, you have to pass that test of 10% of your full cash assessed value minus outstanding bonds, and that would be your bonding capacity. And so once you do receive voter approval, you have up to 10 years to issue the bonds. The board does not have to issue any of the bonds, and it can also issue them in several phases over that 10-year period. And in terms of what the bond proceeds can be used for, it's all things capital, except some very small things like books and software and whatnot. Bonds, as Mr. Vaughn mentioned, are usually used for large capital project items, but because they can be issued over a 10-year period and in phases, they can be used to support things like furniture, technology, and equipment replacement over time. Our statute says that if you're going to use bonds to pay for things like furniture, technology, and equipment, the amount that you can spend from the bonds on these items is limited to the amount of principal that you repay within a 5-year test. So every time you sell bonds, there's a certain amount of principal coming due within that 5 years. That serves as the limit for what you can spend on furniture, technology, and equipment. When you issue bonds, there's a fixed cost with it. That's legal, publishing, credit rating, things like that. And for a bond size that the district has been issuing over the last years, it's about $60,000 in administrative costs every time you sell bonds. So you try and minimize the times that you sell bonds, but you also don't want to be borrowing too much and sitting on a bunch of money for a long time. And then the underwriting costs of that, or sort of the variable costs with issuing bonds, is about 0.8% to 1.2%, depending upon the credit rating and also the length of maturity to the bonds. And so since these bonds are muni bonds, meaning that when the investors get interest payments, they don't have to pay federal income taxes on it. And if they're bought by an owner who lives in Arizona, they don't have to pay Arizona income taxes on that. Because of that, the federal government, you can imagine, doesn't collect taxes on this. And so thereby they want to restrict the amount of these kind of bonds that are issued on the market. And so they basically restrict you every time you go to sell bonds to expect to spend that within 3 years. So that's another way that we size how much you sell and how much you phase your bonds over time. And if, for example, the district was able to earn more in its investments than what the rate of payment is out on the bonds, oftentimes you'll have to pay that back to the federal government like you and I would for our taxes each year. So the federal government is keenly involved in this process. Who determines the payments? Well, our state law says every time you sell bonds, they can't be amortized longer than 20 years. So it's the governing board that decides when the principal amounts are going to come due each July and in amounts in each July through up to 20 years. But it's an underwriter, someone at my firm, an underwriter who sits on a trading desk every day, that establishes the interest rates. And based on those interest rates, investors will decide what they're going to pay for the bonds. Usually the interest rate is set just a little bit higher than what the market value is, so that investors pay a little bit more than the face value for the bonds. And so that you can use that extra premium is what it costs to pay costs and leave you the face, as much as the face amount as possible to do your projects. So who typically buys bonds? Because they're tax exempt, it's usually anybody who pays US income taxes, like money managers, investment funds, corporations, banks, high net worth individuals, and so forth. Bonds are typically sold in little $5,000 increments. So in a typical bond sale for Litchfield, you might have 12, 15 different kinds of investors, where 4 or 5 bond funds will come in for 80% of the bonds, and then the rest of the 20 are sold to smaller investors and individuals and things like that. And so they're sold in $5,000 denominations to allow that to happen. And again, interest is set at a fixed rate. And prepayment on bonds is typically in the muni market across the country about 9 to 10 years without penalty. So with that, hopefully that gives you a little familiarity with just bonds in general. I won't spend a lot of time on this matrix, but this is a matrix of the financing alternatives available to Arizona school districts. Starting on the left column, as Mr. Vaughn talked about a little bit, you do have your district additional assistance budget for capital projects, but when it comes to raising money for schools and large projects like that, it takes a long time to save that money. Of course, there's the Arizona School Facilities Oversight Board, which has a new school facilities program, but you have to qualify for it in terms of students per square foot, and it doesn't seem like any time in the near future that unfortunately the district will be able to qualify for state funding for a new school. However, they do have their building renewal grant program, which the district applies for every year to help upkeep its buildings and maintenance and things like that. The amount of money available each year is appropriated by the legislature, and there is an application process so that you have to go through to qualify for that. So those two items are money available to the state and don't require borrowing, things like that, or secondary taxes. The next three items do require secondary property tax, one being your district additional assistance override. And albeit that can be a useful tool for pay-as-you-go type items, it's limited to 7 years that you can have one. And each one of those years, the override amount is limited to 10% of your RCL. So you can see a 7-year DAA override is also hard to raise a lot of funds to pay for large capital projects, and it only lasts for 7 years. If there are some items of your capital program that you can't fund with bonds, there's very few things that can't be paid for with bonds. A lot of times you'll see districts also ask for a DAA override. We've covered bonds quite a bit, but I'll just reiterate the point. Why do a lot of people use bonds? Well, it can be issued up to 10 years. And when you go to pay them back, they can be stretched out as far as 20 if you want to try and minimize the annual tax impact. And so it provides for funding a capital program. If you think about that you can spend bonds each sale in up to 3 years, not a lot of districts do this, but you have 13 years of capital program that you can fund out of a bond. The second to the right, the board's probably aware of this, is a capital source available from adjacent ways. This does not require a vote. The board can simply levy that, but as you know, it is limited to a very specific capital projects, including offsite utilities, fire lanes, safe ingress and egress. The far right column, I do go ahead and list lease purchase because that can be a way to raise a lot of capital at once. If you keep it to less than 20 years and if you pay it back from unrestricted capital, your own budget, you don't have to get a vote from the electorate to do so. The only insufficiency with a lease purchase really is that it doesn't come with a repayment source to pay it. So if you do a lease purchase, you can borrow, you just have to pay it back with any one of those sources to the left of that far right column there. And so that's why a lot of folks won't do that unless they know they have a bond coming or something like that they can pay it off with. Okay, so hopefully that leaves us a little bit warmed up about bonds and the financing alternatives available to you. This page 5 here is dedicated to your existing bonds. I went ahead and did these numbers as of next fiscal year because next year would be the year in which you would hold the election and would be the year in which you would first consider selling the bonds. So after this July's principal payment, the district's going to have about just over $30 million of principal, and that is amortized for about the next 7 years through July 2030. Your existing payments are $8.5 million right now, and you'll have that payment level for another couple years, and then it was set to decline to about $3.4 million from there through fiscal 30 to provide for a future bond program like we're talking about now. The district's limited assessed value, a very important figure. It's the value that's restricted to grow no more than 5% each year for existing properties. It's the value that's used to determine tax rates. Right now, or for next fiscal year, the county estimate is for $1.4 billion limited assessed value. That's after growing on average about 9.7% over the last 10 years. The pretty high amount, and over the last 5 years, about 12.1%. To pay that $8.5 million payment that's coming due next year, you simply divide it by the 1.4 billion, multiply by 100, and the estimated tax rate for next year is about 59 cents per $100 of a limited assessed value. To give you a feel for that, just 4 or 5 years ago, that was up at about 81 cents or so to raise a similar amount to make payments. And I know I'm talking fast, so maybe I'll take a breath. Sorry. And that is with growth in assessed value. And again, the decline in payments that's scheduled to come in the next couple of years, that tax rate's expected to go down to about 15 cents. There's another kind of assessed value you guys have at the assessor keeps. It's the unrestricted one. It's not limited the amount it can grow from one year to the next. So it's supposed to reflect market value. That's called the full cash assessed value. That one's important because it's the one used in determining your bonding capacity. And for next fiscal year, it's estimated to be about $2.3 billion. And that one has grown about 15% over the last 10 years per year. And over the last 5 years, about 18%. So very substantial growth, as you guys know, in the district. And after you subtract out the district's bonds, that leaves you with a bonding capacity per statute of about 202 million right now. So if it were to consider $100 million, new bond program, that fits within the statute's limit. And just as a piece of interesting information, the district's credit rating is amongst the very top of those in the state. It's a AA1 from Moody's. There's only one grade higher, and yes, another district has that, but one grade higher of credit rating that you can get from Moody's. And just to give you a feel for the growth in assessed value, those are the two different kinds of assessed values in the columns. The dark column is the unrestricted one. You can see it grows faster than the light column, which is the limited assessed value, and it's grown quite substantially for Litchfield Elementary. Okay, so if we were to take a look at a new bond, Mr. Vaughn mentioned that we'd be taking a look at $100 million scenario. We broke that up into two different scenarios. One is which we would issue about an even sale amount over the next 5 years, probably every other year or something like that. So through fiscal 28, and then the second scenario being we would take a look at what if we need to accelerate that program and issue bonds over the next 3 years. We assume the average interest rate was about 4.5%. Keep in mind that muni bond rates are lower than what you see out there because investors don't have to pay taxes on them, so they accept the lower rate. 4.5 is probably 1.25%, 1.5% higher than actually you could get today. But for these scenarios, we just go ahead and assume 4.5%. We assume that all the bonds from this program would be paid off within 15 years. And so that would be fiscal 39. That would be the final payment on those. And even though over the last 10 years, your limited assessed value has grown about 9.7%, and over the last 5 years, 12%, we're trying to be realistic yet a little bit conservative. And so we assume that for the next 5 years, the growth is going to be around 8%. And then after 8%, we assume about 1.8% growth. Again, trying to be conservative, but to provide a little realistic sense on that. So when you put this together, we have the two different scenarios in the columns on the right-hand side. One being if we sold bonds in even amounts over the next 5 years, and the other one being if we sold bonds over the next 3 years in a more accelerated way. In terms of the max tax rate for not just the new bonds, but for the existing bonds, we were able to achieve keeping the same tax rate that we project for fiscal 24, so thereby not requiring a tax rate increase overall in doing this. For the even sales scenario, we could keep that tax rate in place for the first 4 years of the program. And for the accelerated one, we could keep that to actually the next 5 years of the program. And thereafter, the tax rate would decline because of increases in assessed value and so forth. An important figure in holding a bond election is the average tax rate just for the new bonds only. Our statute says that anything that you communicate to voters after you call for the election has to have this average annual tax rate for the new bonds in it. And so for these scenarios, it was about 40 cents for the even sales scenario and about 41 cents for the accelerated sale scenario. And so in terms of what that would cost a homeowner, for each $100,000 of the assessor's limited value, not the market value, but the assessor's limited value on that home for each $100,000. That translates into either $40 or $41, depending upon which scenario that is. And so we go ahead and provide that figure because, you know, there's a lot of different home values out there. And so whenever we're talking tax impact to a homeowner, we always want to remind them that, hey, it's not on Zillow that you look up what the value of your home is to use for taxes, but you need to either go on the assessor's website or they send out a notice of value every February and look up the limited value and take that value and divide it by 100,000. So let's just say it's, you know, 200,000 is the limited assessed value of that home, divided by 100,000, that's 2, and multiply that 2 times either the $40 or the $41. And so it would be $80 instead of 40 for a $200,000 home. And for businesses, the local businesses, not the utilities, because their assessment ratio is 16% and the residential assessment ratio is 10%. They pay 60% more taxes each year for the same value of property. For each $100,000 of business value, that's $64 or $66, depending upon the scenario, instead of the 40 or 41. And again, the extrapolation for 200,000, 300,000, 500,000 works the same. So I managed to talk quick enough. Hopefully that wasn't too fast, but I wanted to give you a feel for what the current status is and for what the impact of new bonds would be like. And so I'll stop talking for a minute and see if we have any questions on any of that.
Ms. Clymer? I don't have any questions, but it was very informative. Thank you for your
Thank
presentation.
you.
Mr. Hodak?
I have a couple questions. Looking at the big picture from the standpoint of a taxpayer, tell me if I'm not correct. From a taxpayer, they're going to get maybe pay a couple $100 more tax a year, whatever. But in a sense, what's happening is this bond is allowing the school to build more schools, presumably that are going to be filled with students. So the district's going to get more revenue to, run those schools, which is, but that's something that is, in other words, the school district theoretically could pay back with that future revenue. Like if they didn't go the bond route, they just went with a lease purchase. That would be a reasonable business model. I can understand why you wanted the bond, but is that assessment correct of basically that the taxpayer today is incurring an increase in tax that is, in a sense, going to allow the district to increase its revenue? So why is, a person could sit there and go, well, why am I paying more taxes? Because actually the district's going to get more revenue.
Madam Chairman, members of the board, Mr. Vaughn, if I could answer just a couple of basic things on that, and then maybe some judgment or subjective value things you guys can provide on that. But I do think you're right. When you build more schools, you can house more students and you get more revenue. But what you also get is more maintenance cost. And you get more maintenance cost with that too. And so you'd have to do an analysis. And so if, for example, there might be a small profit because, say, the bonds would be paying off the building and not a lease purchase or your regular budget, you could fill other types of needs that you wouldn't have in the future. But I think I'd let administration address whether that would satisfy the sort of the educational values and things like that.
So thank you for the question. It's a good one. So just again, as a point of reference, so all of the current students that we have are only generating $5 million of capital. And so while building a new school will allow us to service more students, the increase in the capital funding it would raise from the state would likely not be sufficient to cover the increased maintenance costs that Brian's referring to, and the increased costs of paying down that sort of arrangement, and the increased cost of furnishing that school. while those students would also generate additional M&O money, again, we would have to hire more teachers. And so, yes, there would be more revenue, but there would also be more costs. And just due to the magnitude of the dollar amounts we're talking about, that's what makes it very challenging.
I understand. I mean, I understand the advantage to the district and I'm for the bond. I mean, if we need it, I'm just sort of thinking in terms of your, how you sell it to the public. But I think that there are people, that are smarter than me, and one of them is standing at the podium, that their job is how to do that. So, and what does RCL stand for?
Revenue control limit. It's the sort of the biggest component of your general budget limit.
Right.
There's a
Okay,
couple
yeah,
of
you
add-ons,
explained that
but it's-
earlier.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. No more questions. Thank you
And-
very much. Good presentation.
And I realized I didn't answer part of your question. So in structuring these scenarios with Brian, we've been very cognizant of that tax rate. And so one thing you'll note is even with the new bond, we're structuring it in theory. I mean, it's all on paper, right? But structuring it in such a way that the tax rate the taxpayers would be paying is not increasing from what they're paying today. Because we're not trying to increase taxes. Now, in full transparency, right, the tax rate would decline from what it currently is if we didn't go out for a bond. But we're not structuring this in such a way to increase it from what the community is currently accustomed to paying, if you will.
Thank you.
Mr. Owens?
No questions, thanks. Yeah, bonds can be super confusing, especially like the difference between overrides. So
Yep.
I kind of felt like that Winona Ryder gif with like numbers flying around my head. But super clear. This is great. This is very, very good.
Ms. Moran?
Yeah, I have one other point as a follow-up to Board Member Honak's question, and then I have two other comments. The other thing to keep in mind, in my opinion, when it comes to the pros and cons versus a bond and construct that the district would do organically versus a lease to purchase type agreement, is that it cuts out the middleman and eliminates that additional profit that would be paid to a third party. And in doing so, that helps to overall be good stewards of our money, that we're keeping that on our balance sheet and increasing our assets, which is only going to increase again the overall financial health of the district. In addition to that, there are two things that I really like about this presentation. Overall, it breaks it down about as simple as you can get, which it is a very complicated topic, especially considering all of the caveats that go into state law and what and state statute and what allows us to do. But in particular, with what we are discussing tonight and proposing in relation to this, I like that the 100 million number is less than half of our max capacity for bonds, because that means we are quote unquote living within our means and overall reasonable compared with what we could. So if you think of that compared to like your personal credit score, or if you have a personal credit card that has a $5,000 limit, you don't want to max that out. You want to keep that somewhere in a reasonable range. So I like that 100 million number. I like that we're not trying to overextend ourselves. I also like that there's no tax rate increase. I understand that, as Executive Director Vaughn stated, if we do nothing and we don't go for a bond, the tax rate will actually decrease over time as we get to the end of the life of the current bonds that we have out there. But I like that we are being cognizant that we are not going to raise that actual tax rate for our taxpayers, and there would be at least a consistent number there that they would be asked to pay going forward. So excellent presentation.
I don't have any questions unless you want to tell me what school district has a higher tax rate or credit rating than us, because I'm highly competitive, but otherwise I'm good.
Don't do it.
I'm pretty sure that's available on the internet somewhere if you want to find it.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for that presentation. Our next presentation is going to be by Mr. Brommer.
Evening, President Lidema and the board and Superintendent Gunning. Actually, Don Graves, Mr. Brammer was unable to come tonight. And he had something unexpected came up, so I'm here instead. But if it's any consolation, Mr. Brammer and I have known each other since the mid 1980s, and we've been working together for school districts since the mid 1990s. So not just at the last minute come up here, but we did bring along, this is Taylor Sapero, who's been with our office, not since the 90s, but for a few months now. She has a particular expertise in urban planning and particular types of development and the demographic ramifications to that. And just in case this happened to come up, we thought it'd be helpful to have her here for any questions if something came up along those lines, because we are in a changing environment as far as development. Our study scope is pretty much the same all over, but if you haven't heard this, we'd go in, explain a little bit. The top thing where it says enrollment trends, we take a look at your students today. We take a look at the 40th day head count. We see who the students are, or what grades they're in, where they're located geographically. And we also take a look at alternative providers because that has an impact. Then we come in and also look at the demographic characteristics. We look at the population, the age, the householder age, children age, and how this is changing, because what we see over time is you can have, say, a new development. Everybody moves in and everybody's got kids. And then over time, the kids leave. And so you have your population, your school age population goes down. Then the neighborhoods turn over and families with children move in. So this revolves. So we take a look at that. We take a look at the housing supply and the occupancy rates and, whether owners and renters, because that also plays in. Next issue, the residential development impacts. This happens to be my particular area. We look at the housing types, where it's located, what kind of market we have going on, and we take a look at who's building what, because what's being built has an impact. How many school kids are likely to be in a particular type of house? We have 10 different categories of residential development, so we can kind of try to get that narrowed down a little bit. We take a look at where it's located and who is building the house, because that has an impact as far as the rate and how soon we will start seeing kids. And then at the bottom, we have the enrollment projections. We do something that's, I think, possibly a little different than some places. We do a top-down and a bottom-up scenario. What we do is we take a look at Litchfield Elementary and how does your district fit in the metro region? What kind of growth do we have in the metro region and what is your part of that? From the bottom up is when we're kind of looking at the new development and the older neighborhoods turning over. And we're seeing, okay, what are we adding here? What is realistic to expect that we could be adding? Because we do a 10-year projection, and as we go out, the farther we go out, it gets a little murky, especially with new development. Sometimes project takes off or stops. And so we take a look and we look at the entire valley and see, what's reasonable? What do we have showing up? And is it reasonable in comparison to what's going on in the market overall? So we take a look at it from two different directions to try to get a little bit better handle. Our planning geographies, the district is divided up into 197 planning grids. Now, what this allows us to do is we can take a look at past enrollment and trends. And when we do the projections, we look out in the future and we see, okay, how many school kids can we expect in each of those little boxes? And if we change the attendance areas, like if you build a new school and you change attendance areas, we can take a look at that and say, okay, how much do our demographic and residential real estate conditions. What's the impact now on this new attendance area? And since we don't change the grids, we can go backwards, we can go forwards, we can change them and take a look at what's going on so we can plan at a very small level. Now, we go up here in the kindergarten to 8th grade head count. What we use is the 40th day head count enrollment. We don't use ADM, we use the head count. We just want to count kids in seats on the 40th day. And you can see the blue bars are the actual enrollment. The red squiggly line that's just bouncing around all over, this is the year-over-year change. And what you can see with the blue bars is you had considerable growth going up and through about 2014, 15. It slowed down around then, but it was still going up. And then it kind of leveled out. And some of this has to do with charter enrollment. And then when you have this drop all of a sudden in 2020, that was COVID. And you have this drop and then you've replaced some of that. So this is kind of where we're at as far as the school district total enrollment. We also take a look at the enrollment by grade, and we split up the elementary grades into equal cohorts so we can track what's going on over time. And we'll see the blue line is the K2 group, and the red is the 3rd to 5th grades. The green line's the 6th to 8th grades. And what you see in the period of high growth in the early 2000s, they're growing almost at the same rate. And those bars are right together. What we come up in about 2014, 15, somewhere around in there, and you see the youngest grades drop. And what we'll see in a couple of slides from here, we'll see there is also a pretty big jump in charter school enrollment. And the charter schools tend to like the younger grades because it's easier. They can make more money, basically, to put it bluntly. And then of course, we've got the drop with COVID. The other thing that's kind of encouraging in your district, if you look at the K2 group, the blue line, right at the very end, in the last couple of years, we see that it's come out of COVID and actually has a little bit of a rise there at the end. And the middle grades are pretty much flat. But what happens is the K2 group gets older, they move up into the 3 to 5 group, which should bring that number up. And then in another 3 years after that, they'll be in the oldest group. So we'll see these lines, changing again. This map shows us the enrollment distribution. These purple markers indicate one of your students. And you'll see you've got a lot of students way to the east and a lot of students to the west. You basically don't have anybody in the middle. We have this corridor with the 303 and the industrial and the Luke noise contours, and you have the district is just split in half, essentially. And we also, you look outside of the district, you'll see there's other dots where you've brought in students from outside the district. So this is where your kids are at. The enrollment density, basically, we're looking at the same thing, except now we've put them into the planning grids and basically done a density map by planning grid, and it's by square mile so that we're comparing apples to apples, oranges to oranges. And again, you'll see with the red and the blue, you've got more higher density with the red areas and lower density with the blue areas. Like clear in that very northern part, you've got a lot of large lot houses, very low density. You also have low density of school kids. So we look at that. So another way for us to plan. Now we have in the pre-COVID period, the change in enrollment. And again, this time we're doing red and blue, with red means high growth, blue means either low or a decline. And what you can see is pre-COVID, you still have quite a bit of growth in the east half of the district and in the west. But you're seeing a lot of blue also in the eastern half. You know, these are the older areas. They're starting, the kids are going to high school or college maybe. And so you're having some changes in the density. What we have here is the same type of map, and again with the planning grids, except this is post-COVID. And now what you can see is it's almost all blue in the eastern half. We're losing the students, they're getting older, and there's not much new development going on. Right now, there's about, I think, 3 infill projects. We're on the far eastern part of the district, but they're all less than 200 lots. So you don't have a lot of new housing to replace or to counteract the aging of the population. Now, you do have quite a bit of red here with the high growth that's coming in some of these newer areas, you know, Arroyo Seco, Canyon Views, and Verado is, of course, have been growing for 20 years. So you've got that, and it's, again, we're kind of having this bifurcation in the district between the east and the west. Demographic trends. There's a whole bunch of numbers on here. I'm not even going to pretend that I'm going to go through most of them, but the high points, if we look up at the top there, we have the kids, you know, 5 to 13, school age or about to be school age, and between, you know, 20 to 2010 and then to 2020, and then, you know, currently you have the share of this youth population is going down. And just the growth in general is slowing down. I mean, you had about 11% annual growth in the early 2000s. So this is slowing down. But you still have a pretty healthy size youth population. The other thing that we look at especially is the age of the householders. This is down towards the bottom. And we have, this is dropping from like 19% in the 35 to 54-year-old age group. These tends to be, you know, the families that are having kids. And we're dropping from about 39% to 31%, which is still quite a few potential parents, but the number is going down and the group over 65 is growing. So again, you've got an aging population. Birth rate. I cannot explain this one nearly as well as Rick can, but I'll try to hit the highlights. Basically, we have the birth rates just took a dive in about 2007 with the recession. And then it came down for after a few years, you know, the market, you know, the economy's getting better, and it kind of leveled out, and pretty much everybody would expect the birth rates to go back up because that's typically what happens after a recession. And unfortunately, what happened is they went down again. And this creates some problems because the birth rates, you know, in the last 20 years have dropped by like 30%. The situation would be even worse if we didn't have in-migration, which helps, you know, bring in some new people, but the birth rate's gone down and that will continue to have some impact on us for a while. If you look down at the bottom, there's some years under the bottom, and what we're looking at is if the birth rate is at this point now, when does that affect our kindergartners? So when you see the low line, we've got another 4 or 5 years, you know, that we're going to still see the impact. You see this map or this chart also has Pinal County, which is the one place where the line has been going up. And kind of the one difference with Pinal County is there's a lot more lower price housing, which means younger families. And this is something that's affecting, you know, districts in general, but it's also just something to keep in mind because this is something we're looking at. You know, what happens in the future depends a lot on this type of thing and, you know, the kind of market we're in. Going alternative providers. Well, as I mentioned, there was a big increase by about, I don't know, it was like 500 or 600 students in 2015 and 16. Had a big increase. We actually had a decrease in the total charter school enrollment here in 2021. What we are thinking, and this is something we see and we have seen in other school districts, and we do a couple of hundred school districts, you know, a year, and we're looking at this. And what we've been seeing lately is the charter schools seem to be kind of leveling out. It's like charter schools always want to operate at capacity. They don't want to build for as many kids as they could take in. They want to set the number of kids they think is profitable and not have any empty seats. And what we think is that over time, we've also consolidated the market. So now we've got a few large charter school operations instead of having, you know, 50 really small outfits. And it kind of feels like we're saturating the market. We don't know this for a fact, but we kind of think that's what might be going on. Of course, you have higher population come in. Somebody's going to notice that and want to come in and maybe build another charter school. We have the charter schools mapped. Everybody that's within your district and within about a mile of the district. Because the charter schools basically are looking to be someplace in a transportation corridor. So if they're, you know, a mile outside the district, they could still attract your kids. Whereas we don't know what kids are going to the charter schools, but we kind of figure, well, if the charter school is located in your district, that's probably where they're getting most of their kids. And if you'll notice, most of the charter schools are in the eastern half of the district, where you've so far have had the largest part of the population. You also have a few private schools, which are in the green dots. You don't have too many of them, but you do have a few, and they tend to be pretty consistent over time as far as their enrollment. Residential development, okay. On this bar chart, the blue indicates single family, orange indicates multifamily, and the green indicates age-restricted housing. What we've had over the last 10 years, about 65% of the housing units that have been added to the district have been single family. About 14% have been multifamily, but if you'll notice, all of the orange parts of the bar are in the last half a dozen years, pretty much. Last year, the multifamily component was about 30% of the total. So the 14 is over 10 years. So what you have is, like we had mentioned, a changing development market. You're increasing multifamily. And this is going to kind of keep happening. The age restricted is about 20%, and that's been pretty consistent for the entire 10-year period. You've still got, you know, the Pebble Creek, they're still building, Verado, Victory, they're still building. And that's been pretty consistent for, you know, for the last decade. And the recent building permits, here it's a little hard to see, but if you look, there's green markers, which indicates a building permit. We've got a few clear up in the northeastern part of the district. Like I said, there's a couple of small infill developments up there, and there's another one over by the river to a little farther to the south. But you've got a lot of these green markers are in the far western part of the district. Arroyo Seco, Canyon Views, Sendero Trails, or I guess they call it windrows in most of those subdivisions. And that's where we're getting, you know, most. The ones in the center are primarily age restricted. So again, you know, we have, you know, this east-west divide going on. In the last year of the single family that was built, about 77% of it was in the western half of the district. We go into the residential potential. Again, the blue bars indicate single family, either low density or high density. like I said, we have about a half a dozen categories for single family because we try to look, there's a different age structure to a house that's 5 to an acre versus a house that's 2 to an acre. There's different ages, different numbers of kids. So we, just to simplify things, we split this up into, 2 categories. So you see, you have quite a bit of a mix of low density, higher density. You are getting more higher density, like pretty much everybody else in the valley. And this tends to be, higher density, lower cost, younger families. That's typically what you're going to see. You're also seeing in the potential a lot of multifamily, and this could actually grow. As we have right at the moment, there's about 76% of the total potential that we're seeing is single family, and about 85% of that is in the western half of the district. Development timing. This is my favorite map. This is color coded by the time period of development. The red, the solid dark red, means it's an active subdivision right now. They are right now building houses. You'll see some that's red, but it's kind of pale. Basically, it's because there are lines running through there, so it's not solid colored in. They're subdivisions, but they're also essentially infill projects. We don't have a custom, or we don't have a production builder going in there and building, 100 houses a year. You have people going in and buying a lot, hiring somebody to build a house on it. Russell Ranch is an example up to the north. You will have, consistent development over time, but it could be over a really long time. It's very slow. The dark orange, which you can see over at Arroyo Seco, like you'll see red and dark orange at Arroyo Seco, indicates a subdivision that's about to start development, like probably in the next year. There's developments that right now, I've driven through here a few weeks ago. The curbs are in, the streets are paved, the infrastructure's there, the lots are there. They're just waiting for the framers to show up and they can start building houses. And that's in a few different places there. The lighter orange is it's off a little ways. Like when you're looking at Abel Ranch. Meritage is in there. They are grading this. They are putting the infrastructure in, but it's going to be a couple of years before we're seeing, the houses. And then we get to the lighter yellow. This is a little farther down the road. So we color code this. And as you look at it, there's not much going on in the eastern half of the district. And in the western half of the district, it looks like it's on fire because it's all red and orange. You have right now about 75% of the housing growth, of the single family growth, is in the west. And as we go out in this 10-year projection period, we're going to go up to about 90% of the single family growth is going to be in the west. There's simply not enough land to add very much else in the east. The east is going to be an area that's going to be governed by the demographics as the people grow older, and a few infill projects and some multifamily projects. But the west is where you're going to have, considerable single family development. And that's kind of shifting your school age population is going that direction. We still see a lot of growth going there, especially in the next 5 years. We see, pretty heavy growth as we come out of this current market slowdown. There's still quite a bit of capacity. Builders are still going there. They're creating new lots. They're getting ready to go. But in the last 5 years, this is going to slow down. The demographic projections. Okay. What we do here is this is where we combine the new housing starts. And we'll see under the housing units, when we get down here, the bold indicates something that's already happened, where it's colored kind of the light blue. This is what's coming online. And we're looking at if they're building the house now, we're not counting it until next year. It takes a while to build the house. But we're looking at, the new housing units. We're also looking, this is where we have the demographics comes into play, into what's happening with the housing units that are already here. And the occupancy rate, because this changes. And after the recession, it created a lot of changes. You'd have areas with the population shot up without any houses. Just refilling the ones that were already there. So we look at that and try to come up with households, which is an occupied housing unit. So we combine these. And what we see is over the next 10 years, we're going to see, 15 to 1,800 single family houses a year, especially in this, at least in this early period. And we're going to have the population per household is a little higher. It's going to drop, but it's a little higher than in general in the valley. This is still a very popular area. In fact, the Western Valley is getting very popular for home builders wanting to come here, and they want to sell to families. So you're going to see a lot of that. So you're going to have about 9,500 new single family, another 3,500 multifamily. You're going to have a lot of units coming in. And then the next 10 years, about an extra 12,000 households. And that part leads us to the enrollment projections. And again, we're looking at the school age population of all kids between 5 and 13. This is what we're interested in. This is who we're trying to capture. And we see the population per household is down, and it's probably going to continue to fall some. This is just kind of a reality of the way the demographics are moving, is, the households are getting smaller. That's kind of the way it's going. And in the next 10 years, we're growing from, 14,000 to over 16,000, school age kids. Now over to the right, we have a column marked enrollment population ratio. What this is we've mentioned the charter schools, the private schools. Not all of the school kids that are over there under that school age population, not all of those kids are going to one of your schools. And they're not going to all be going to one of your schools. That's, again, just a reality. All right, now you've got a enrollment population ratio of about 75%. And this is pretty good. It's less than it was a couple of years ago. You were hitting over 80 before COVID. And what happened is after COVID, and we've seen this go two different ways in different districts. Everybody lost kids during COVID. Some districts, they got most of them back. And these tend to be the, let's say, the lower income districts, tended to get most of those kids back. And the higher income districts didn't get the kids back after, the restrictions from COVID. Probably, you had people with more means. They found an alternative way to go, whether it's online, teaching at home, charter school, private school, whatever. Anyway, but still, you've dropped down to about 75% for your enrollment population ratio. And this is actually pretty good. It's better than some of the districts right next door. So that's good news for the district. It's likely to decline. When we look at this, we try to be fairly conservative in how we look at the future. Likely to decline. What's very unfortunate for us is that we can't actually predict that because there's nothing to base how many parents are going to send their kids to a charter school. That's out of our control. We can make pretty educated guesses about the changes in the population, the demographic changes. We can make pretty good estimates on the growth of housing units. What we don't know is whether a parent decides to send their kids to a charter school. So this is unscientific, but what it also means is that 75% can go up. So this could be, an opportunity. Now here we've charted this same thing. You'll see the line is going at a fairly steady decline. That's what the line across the top going sideways. Fairly steadily until we got to COVID, and you see that big drop. And then now we're seeing we're expecting the same trend. We're not expecting an accelerated decline, but just to be conservative about this, we're not looking for an increase in the number of kids or the percentage of kids, going here, but it is a possibility. And, yeah, I mean, if it increases, that could make a change. What we are doing is looking at the change of enrollment, using that trend line, is expecting, the number of kids, to go down, number of charter school kids increasing. And we have here, and like in the next 5-year period, a small area projection based on those planning grids. And again, the red is growth, blue is not growth or decline. And you can see you got a lot of blue, the eastern half of the district, and a lot of red in the western half of the district. And this is basically going to be driven by new home construction. You've got a lot of that going on, and then the eastern half, you've got an aging population. And as we go into the next period, the 2027 to 32 period, growth everywhere drops. But you still have some areas of growth in the western part of the district. Something I forgot to bring up, and I think I'm going to go back to the timing there. Timing. I marked this on the map, but I didn't mark it very well. We were talking about the 3 school sites. They're on this map. They're a little hard to read, but if you look up in the northern part, you'll see where it's in white letters, it says Site 1. That is the site by Zanjero Trails, and it's a little bit north of where there are currently 4 subdivisions are platted, and the construction equipment is out there now to get ready to start building the road north of the existing high school, going up those new subdivisions. The second site in the middle is also Zanjero Trails, kind of right in the middle. And the third site is to the south. And what might be worth pointing out is the southern site doesn't have a lot of growth around it. The middle site has a lot of growth, but it's a lot of growth that's happening right now or just in the past. And the northern site is where the growth is coming. Now, how that's going to play into, your decisions, but it might be worth, mentioning that, here's the past, here's the future, and, if that's going to have an impact, might want to look at that and go on to the projections. The school projections, we do this. We look at the school kids per planning grid. We do some estimates about what school we think they are actually going to attend. And what we come up with, we look at this capacity. And as we look out into the future, the yellow shaded areas are when you're at 90% capacity, which already fits a couple of your schools now. The red is when you're hitting 100% capacity, which is obviously, this is high. This is when you're hitting overcrowding. You've got 3 K-5 schools that are going to be at or over capacity within about the next 3 or 4 years. And a couple of the K-8 schools also in the same, you're getting overcrowding in several of these schools. And if I'm not mistaken, they're all on the west side of the district. The one school, I believe it's Mabel Paget. I believe it's actually on both sides of the 303. But the reason it's gonna be overcrowded is because the west side of the 303, it takes in Abel Ranch and Allen Ranches. So there's about 1,500 houses are gonna be showing up in that particular district. And a little later, you're gonna have, some of the middle schools start getting a little bit overcrowded, but it's gonna be a little ways. So the conclusions, well, obviously, we're having a lot of housing growth. And we're having a lot of it is being offset by alternative providers. We don't know yet what might happen because of the new voucher rules. We don't know what kind of an impact that's going to have. It's a little bit too soon for us to tell. But it's possible that it'll have an impact. And then again, it might not have any impact. Let's see. We've got, there's a student decline in 2021 was driven by COVID. You got about 400 of those 1,100 students back. A lot of the parents found alternatives. Some of these things shake out. Somebody finds an alternative, and then after a couple of years, that kid graduates, and maybe the next parents make a different decision. So this can fluctuate, but that's something that has been a reality so far. Housing construction is going to be high, especially in the next 5 years. What we're seeing is a lot of growth in the next 5 years in the single family market. You're going to have quite a lot in the multifamily market. How much of that is going to have an impact? Depends. Of the multifamily we're getting, any of it that is going to have an impact in the district is some of the single family rentals that are in the western half of the district, including one project with 400 lots. That is basically, it's going to be built, at least to my knowledge, this is how it's going to go. It's going to be built as regular subdivisions, except as rentals. And of course, the good news, or good or bad news, is that if you have that, the rentals, basically the same people that move in will move in, stay a few years, move out, and the same type of household will move in. So you don't have households where people move in and the kids grow up and go away and the parents are still living there. You have people move in, if the houses appeal to people with young children, those kids will grow up, those parents move out, and another household with young children will move in. So that will just kind of revolve. And then again, the growth, and just to reiterate, the enrollment is going to be impacted by the aging of population, especially in the eastern half. And the national birth rates are also going to have an impact. Of course, that's true in every district. And other providers is an issue, but you do have quite a bit of housing growth, and it's all on the western part of the district. I hope I haven't bored anybody. If you have any questions for me or Taylor, we'll attempt to answer them.
Ms. Clymer, did you have any questions? This is really interesting. Thank you guys for putting this together. I don't know if just a question or maybe just what your thoughts are on, the multifamily housing obviously is right now the hottest thing out there, right? I mean, it's growing like crazy. At least what I've seen, and this is just anecdotally in our market or in our district, is they are nicer than they've ever been, right? The rents are higher than they were previously, and people are moving in, and school age kids or families with school age kids are moving in, or younger kids that will be school aged soon. Do you anticipate that's going to continue? And I mean, like you said, it's going to be a consistent market because of the revolving door of the rental market. I totally understand that. Do you anticipate as more multifamily comes in, it will stay at that level so that there'll be more and more families that are moving in and staying there for a period of time?
We're looking at it from a couple of different directions. One is because it's so hard to get into a house now.
Yeah.
There's some households or, some couples might just go ahead and rent
Mm-hmm.
just because, that's what's, available as a practical matter. The other thing to keep in mind is there are different types of multifamily. And again, we have those classified in about 4 different categories. And something that we actually look at every summer, we sit down and start looking at multifamily in different districts to see, are we getting any kids out of these places?
Mhm.
So that we can adjust our, what you call a generation rate, how many kids per household do you expect? And it's different from one type of unit to another type of unit. It's also different from the same type of unit in one district to the exact same kind of project in a different district. You can build the same kind of apartment project in Gilbert and have a bunch of kids and have the same kind of project in Scottsdale and not have any. It changes a lot. And we also have the wild card is there is multifamily, like just the apartments. About 75% or more of that apartment market now is these high rent, high amenity projects that people want to live there because they want the exercise room, the movie theater and all this stuff. We're also seeing the growth. In fact, it's the hottest single housing segment in the country right now is the single family rentals, or called the horizontal apartments. You've already got some of those in the district. There are plans for,
Yeah, more
several
coming.
more.
Yeah.
and as far as, are you gonna get kids out of them? I think I'm gonna throw this over to Taylor, because this.
Yeah, I'd be interested to see. I mean, if it's subjective district by district, what are we seeing or what do you think we're seeing from now moving forward that we'll continue to have a high number of kids as that segment grows, or will that level off like everything else?
Yeah, so those build for rent projects, according to the developers themselves, are really popular with young families, but specifically single moms. They want to live somewhere where they can still have that single family style house, but not have, the maintenance, the upkeep, the mortgage that comes with a single family home. So it's a great entryway to that kind of lifestyle, but they're also using it as a way to get closer to better schools. They might not be able to afford a mortgage on an actual home in a good school district, but they have the capability to rent one in a school district that they are comfortable sending their kids to, that they feel safe in, all those things that are calculated when you're moving to a specific place, especially when you're renting. And so we're seeing that those units specifically popular with single families or newly divorced parents or so my guess would be yes, especially in this part of the valley. You're going to see a lot of those people that are in those transition periods of their life revolving the door with kids and build for rent projects.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Mr. Honak.
Yeah, thank you. Pretty impressive presentation. Early on, when you showed the grids, and I saw little numbers in the grids, 31B, this and that. What do those numbers mean?
Which,
It's about the third slide in the presentation. With the very first thing you got the grids.
I'm having a hard time hearing Mr. Honak.
How's that? Sorry. Okay, thank you. So, yeah, it was one of the first slides that, that just showed the quarter section or the, grids, and then there were numbers within that, are they identifying parts of schools or whatever?
He's referring to the grid codes.
oh, okay. Back to planning job.
Okay.
The first map that shows up with those grids, basically the numbers in there are just an identifier.
Okay, all right, so they
Now,
just,
as we go forward, we're still using the same grids, but the numbers go up another couple of.
so they're just subdivisions of the grid, with some are more dense and
Well-
you divide them up.
No, the first map just shows what the grid is. We have a name, a number for it, so we know, where it is, and so we can use it for our mapping purposes and then compare it to kids. Is we come up to say like the enrollment density, and you look at these maps and the ones following, the numbers in there are numbers of students.
Yeah, it says the identifier. Okay, so that question wasn't worth the time, sorry, I asked it. So, we also saw enrollment flattened in 2014, and I couldn't hear what the reasoning was. In 2014, it had gone up and then it just kind of flattened out. And what was the reason for that? Just saturation? Or-
There was a big jump in charter enrollment. Right about that time, it went up by something like 600 students in a year.
Okay,
And this is one of the unfortunate things that we deal with the charter schools is when we're showing it trending, we're showing it trending at a particular rate. It's 1.5% a year, for example, it's going down 1.5% a year. That's not actually what happens. What happens is it's not doing anything, and then it changes by 3%. It'll, the charter enrollment will go like this. It'll go like this when they build a new school, and then it'll just stay flat like that. Then it'll go up. School closes, and all of a sudden it just drops. And those schools don't close often enough, as far as I'm concerned. But that is what happens. It's not a straightforward
Yeah,
thing. It's like over time, it's 1% or 1.5%,
Right.
but it's
Okay.
not even. But that year, there was a big jump in charter enrollment.
okay, so based from them. And then, and I think you answered that as I think we're right now 75%. My question was about 25% of kids in district are going to charter, something like that. And 75% are going here. Is that a rough?
Something like that.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
all I need, approximate. Okay.
Yeah, that's what we're looking, we have the number of kids and the number of kids in school. And then, we just, divide that and come up with a
Right.
percentage. And like I said, 75 is actually pretty good for
So say we're currently at 75, so the other 25 are either going to charter or private. school
charter, private schools,
or
homeschool,
homeschool.
online. There's a lot of options, and unfortunately, we don't really know
Yeah.
who exactly is going where. But
Yeah, but at least, yeah. So, and then I had a question on high density families, but I think that kind of answered pretty good because it seemed like a lot of them are just single or people or young couples that are not wanting to have kids, but I didn't think about the single mom situation. So that's a big deal. And then infill is just like Pascalotti Ranch, is Russell Ranch, like, it's just like they got a bunch of 1 acre lots and whenever somebody comes along and wants to build a house, they do that. Is that what infill is, or?
when we refer to infill, we actually refer to it in two different ways. One is like what you just described. You've got a big project or a big
Right.
subdivision, Russell Ranch, they've got hundreds of lots. Somebody comes in, they build a house. Somebody comes by, 3 months from now and they build a house. We also talk about infill as being very small subdivisions. We don't see this quite as much in this district as we do in some, but we have sometimes what happens, you'll have somebody will come in and buy 5 acres, subdivide it, build a dozen houses, and they're in and out of there,
Right. Okay.
within a year. And we also look at that as being an infill project. There's kind of two different kinds. Neither one of them add a lot of houses in a short period of time.
Okay, that answer, thank you for that. So, and then one question, I know that's not really what your study was about, but in the long term, for declining schools, eventually, they just need to be selectively closed, or there's gonna get to a point where there's more facility than you need, and so I'm just wondering, not necessarily here, but just sort of historically, if it got to that. I hope it doesn't. I think we need some plans to figure out how to not have that happen.
That's a good question. This is part of what we get into with, when we talk about the rolling over of subdivisions. Like I said, you have a new subdivision, everybody moves in at once. And if it's a subdivision where they have lots of kids, all of a sudden you have this big spike. And then over time, the kids grow up and they go away. And, the people get older. I mean, my brother, his two kids, they went to Kyrene schools. They're both out of college, and my brother and his wife are still living in the same house.
No, I
But this
understand. And there's places where schools are closed that I know of, not
Right,
out here.
But
so-
the other thing that's happening is in his neighborhood, there's people now with children moving back in.
Right.
This is something that happens. There is school closings. And in fact, we work with a couple of districts on trying to decide which schools should be closed. It probably not going to happen in this district for a pretty long time, but it does happen. And at that point, you tend to maybe, you still hang on to the properties because there's a district, I can't remember now which one it is, but there was a district several years ago. You figure we're not going to have any more kids, and they sold some of the properties. Gentrification happened, and you have all these people moving in, a bunch of them have kids, and they say, well, where's the school? Right. And that gives another, issue,
Right.
but it's one that I don't think you're gonna have to worry about in this district for probably a really long time. Certainly not in the next 10 years.
Yeah, so I kind of, I like to make a big picture sort of analysis of what I'm hearing. I mean, one of the things that we said that there was a big move really along with COVID to charters and stuff like that. And I think that everybody pretty much in this room knows that a lot of parents saw what was going on when the teaching went into their house with online. They didn't like what they saw, and they went. They decided instead to come back, and they moved because the data shows that. I mean, that's where about 13% drop. And also the building seems to be in more or less more affluent areas. So which I believe I heard some data presented, or that in fact the move to charters is more likely in the more affluent areas. So what my observation is, and just want to get your feedback, is it seems like it's that your demographic study is very good, but it's only half of the picture on the bigger picture of the bond and planning what we're doing. Because we do have at least half the district is non-growth. And that's an issue. You can't ignore that part. So I'm just saying I mean, it seems like the future of the district is really based upon what it's providing, what it's selling to the public. And so, and there's some indications that what it's selling is not, people are going to move into an area, people that have money, they're going to move into it most of all because it's safe. And it's a good place for the kids and schools and stuff like that. And that I think is, we all agree is a fact. But what I see is that really this district kind of needs to reinvent itself to not just stick with the model that it has right now, but it needs to offer what the charters are doing. I mean, the charter is totally a free market thing. I mean, if people don't like what they're selling, they're out of business. So they got to be offering more. And so, well, all I'm saying is that, I mean, I guess if I'm going to turn it into a question, and you didn't do a scientific study on it, but you're experts, there are all sorts of variables, doesn't that seem that's actually a big factor that would determine whether all these numbers, the projections in the future are all could be skewed completely differently depending on how our model compares to other free market models that depend, and their availability. Does that make sense what I'm?
Well, yeah, as you said, it's not something we specifically were studying. When we do look at the charters, we are trending it as we see there's a general trend, and it is about 1.5% a year in the state. But you are going to get a point because the charters aren't in the business of education. Charters are in the business of making money. Their product is, schools, but they're not going to take every kid that shows up. And that's, one big difference with the schools. And if they decide they don't like a location, they'll simply close and go away. So if a parent chose a charter school because, hey, it's right down the street, charter school decides to close, they go move a couple of miles away, and that's no longer true. And, so this is another variable for the charters. And what we're wondering, because we've seen this in some other districts where it looks like the charter numbers aren't continuing to climb. They're kind of leveling out, and we're thinking part of this must be because you've only got, like a half a dozen different players. They're building big purpose-built schools, but after a while, you kind of saturate the market. And
But
we
aren't
that
they
part
gonna be
yet?
expanding in the same, aren't they looking at the same data that you've compiled, and maybe they can't, they don't have it, but they know what's being built and stuff. They're gonna be other charter schools moving into these areas.
That's true, but the other thing that affects charter schools is they've got to go buy the land. They're not going to get a donation from a builder
Right.
because, the builders actually like the schools. And I was, just remarking at actually a different district. You drive into this one brand new subdivision and the houses are pretty expensive. The first sign you see after the one announcing the name of the subdivision is telling you what school district you're in.
Right.
And that makes a big difference. If your school district has a good reputation, that means a lot. And the builders, they like schools. In fact, in the same district, the builder is wanting to know how soon can they have a school there? Because they want one. And the charters, they have to go out and buy land, and they have the same problem that everybody trying to buy a house has. The land's all getting expensive. And for the charters, they're not feeling a need that they need to have space for X number of students. They want to have X number that they can afford. If the price of the land is too high.
Well, I
they-
think actually you answered my question because I didn't form my question. I made my question sound like it was about charter schools as a competition, but you said, my question really is, people want to move into an area because they're good schools. That's really the issue. So,
That is.
that's what I'm for here is making our schools better. That I think that's a huge thing that we need to focus on to justify the bond and justify building the schools and ensuring that our blue areas that are not growing, that people are going to want to move into those houses and fill those schools and stuff like that with families. And so I think that's you did answer my question, at least in terms of the desirability of the schools as a factor in the growth of an area, and the growth of the area it's a self-fulfilling prophecy in a sense.
It is, and just taking a look here, when I mentioned about the enrollment to population ratio and that Litchfield, you're hitting at about 77% right now. The average of basically metropolitan Phoenix is about 72.5. So you're doing better than most of the districts in the metro area. So yes, this is good. And yes, if there's something that can be done better, it's an opportunity to capture more of those kids. And pre-COVID, you were capturing, that rate was like over 80. I don't remember, and but you had your district and every district lost a lot of kids for COVID, but the pandemic seems like it went on forever, but it didn't. And over time, people are going to forget about it. And over time, people's attitudes change. And we've seen this in districts where, there's one district I can think of where a lot of their kids were going to another district because it was a new area. They moved there. They're still comfortable, back in an older established area. Few years down the road, not the case anymore. They've settled in, they've gotten used to, what's normal for them by then, and it changes. So yes, you're absolutely correct. There are things that can be done, and you bring up that service rate, and that helps. Of course, that just means that you'll need more seats for the schools.
In a sense, I mean, we're also competing with like Pinal County. I mean, people make a choice of where to live. And it's more affordable there. So I don't know what's going on there with schools, and not our problem, except for that people do have choices, and do they want to suffer the pain to buy a little more expensive, versus be more comfortable buying cheaper,
I mean, there's a trade-off, and something that I bring up quite a bit as far as, the residential real estate is what you like to have in an area is diversity of housing. What we've seen happen in some areas, including Pinal County, is if there's a drop in the market, they really suffer because there's really only one market segment being served. Something that's helpful for this district, that's kind of happening all over in the West Valley, is the market is diversifying, and especially this district. So you've got something to offer for more people, a wider range of people. And this is something it means you won't have, the downturns won't be quite as bad, and you'll have a wider population range, which is helpful.
Thank you.
Mr. Owens.
Yeah, I have no questions. Thanks for the presentation. This is very helpful. For me, who's either lived in this map area or just outside of it my whole life, and anybody who's lived in this area growing up, to know where we started and to know where we're still going to go is wild. So, but this is, for as far as picking a school site, this is helpful.
Ms. Moran.
Yeah, I just want to make a statement that I greatly appreciate the data and the analysis piece of this presentation, knowing that you, as the demographer and us as the board cannot predict the future. It's reassuring to know that we have solid historical and projected demographic data to make the most informed decision possible, utilizing both the history and the trends. So I think this is amazingly useful, and I really appreciate the information that was provided.
Thank you. I don't have any questions. Well, actually, maybe I do. Maybe this is a district question, possibly another time. But looking at this, it says we have next school year that we're going to go into. We're going to open with 2 schools already at the red, right? Which means that no growth can happen at those schools. So we're obviously, if we approve this bond or whatever, that's not going to have us have a new school next school year. So what do we as a board need to be thinking about to solve that problem quickly?
Thank you for asking. As you know, we brought for approval earlier portables. So that's part of the quickest solution we can do. We also likely will be continuing working with applied economics, looking at if there's anything we can do, not for next year. I don't want to scare anybody, but in the short term regarding boundary changes to schools with capacity. What's difficult, and we already talked about it, but what's difficult is where our capacity is nowhere geographically near where the overcrowding is. And we are very much geographically split into effectively 2 different regions, with the large 303 corridor and warehouses in between. With our challenges with student transporters at the same time. Busing across that corridor is a difficult challenge to think about. And even if we didn't have the student transporter issue, there's still safety concerns and other reasons you wouldn't necessarily want to do that. Having children on buses for that long, for example, is typically not a good idea. But this slide really is what's driving our discussion and thinking around the fact that we do need to build additional capacity, especially in that west side where that growth is. If the board decides to go for the bond and if the voters approve it, our hope would be that that new school could potentially open for the 2027 school year. It would be the first priority of the bond program and bond proceeds. But obviously, construction of that size is not something that happens overnight. But the short answer to your question is that we will likely begin looking at boundary changes with the hope that we can make some adjustments to get us to the point that that new school comes on board.
Okay, so we have portables, but we're not expecting like, yay, everything goes great. They're in December, right? So that's halfway through next school year. And that's if everything goes great, and none of us is expecting that to actually happen. So what are we doing again? We have 2 schools that are going to open this year already at capacity.
So one thing to keep in mind is how we calculated this capacity. So we calculated the operational capacity on a best case scenario. So as an example, ensuring that all specials teachers have their own classroom. And some of our schools that have capacity concerns right now, they are doing specials on a cart and moving space to space. So I guess what I'm trying to say is the capacity being shown on this slide is a planning capacity and what we would like the maximum of the school to operate at. But we have been working with those individual principals, and there are plans in place to be able to operate next year.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Did anybody else have any other questions? Okay. Thank you. This was very helpful. Thank you very much for the presentation.
Okay, thanks for having us, and hopefully we didn't take up too much of your.
Thank you.
I'm going to have us take a 2-minute break if that's okay.
Ooh, that was the bottom.
we are gonna get this started again. Mr. Honak. Something for you? No, it's from Thomas Heck. It's from Thomas Heck. Our next presentation is going to be by Mr. Young.
Okay, much better. All right, so again, my name is Greg Young. I'm a senior project manager with a company called Bureau Veritas. You guys we did your facility condition assessment, which means we came into your buildings, we were in this building, we crawled on the roofs, we looked at your mechanical areas. And we just want to kind of give a brief presentation of what we did and how we came about our costs. So this is BD at a glance. You know, we've done $150 million of revenue. We've done 50,000 square feet or 50,000 different projects. And we do mainly, I'd say about 45% of that is school districts. We do hospitals, we do retail centers, we do commissioning, but the most of my specialty is in hospitals and schools. So this is kind of where I like to park and everything. You see, we've got a ton of people doing this. Most of our people are registered architects. I'm a mechanical engineer. So when we send people out to this school, we'll normally send either one or two people being an architect and an engineer. So we kind of have that expertise to speak on. One of the things that we kind of get a lot of the times is where do we get our costing from? So if we were building a new school building, or if we were doing renovations in California, Washington, DC, our costs are going to be $1,200-$1,300 a square foot. Phoenix, Dallas area, you're looking at $450, $500, and from there we can adjust. We use a company called Taylor, Marshall and Swift. We use RS Means, and we also have our own in-house cost team that we develop weekly. We look at our costs and kind of, you know, we'll make sure that we're getting the right cost for package units. We're getting the right cost for lighting systems, that kind of thing. So we put a lot of effort into making sure our costs are as close as they can be. They can never be 100% because you guys may buy 5 package units at a time and get a really good deal on them. We can't anticipate that, but we really pride ourselves on getting as close as we can. Okay, so the physical needs assessment is really kind of interesting. So what we do is when we go on site and we have you guys have probably seen the guys with the iPads and ladies with the iPads. Well, we'll go on site and we'll look at your site and infrastructure. So we look at everything from your backflow preventers in your parking lots to your parking lots itself, the playgrounds, your ball fields, your dugouts, everything. From there, well, that's the site and the infrastructure. There we look at the building exterior. We look at your windows and walls. All of our assessments are visual assessments. We do, it's called NDE determination, non-destructive examination. We don't drill holes in walls. We don't drill holes in your ceilings. If we see an issue, like if we go into a basement, we see a lot of water scale in there, we'll say, well, we need to have a professional engineer come in here and do drill tests and really get in detail. Ours are all visual assessments, but our guys are pretty good at picking up on cues, you know, water scaling, you know, suspect mold growth and stuff like that. We look at your windows, your doors, all of your openings. And while we're doing this, we also do an accessibility purview where we look at the real high level accessibility. Do you have entrance in? Do you have egress out? Do you have parking for accessibility? That kind of thing. The next one is we go on your roof. We look at all of your roofs, determine if it's a vegetative roof, a TPO, polyethylene, whatever it is. And we look at all your mechanical systems that are sitting up on top of the roof, because a lot of times when they install big, large mechanical units, they tend to damage the roof or they damage the curb. So we pay close attention to all of that. We look at the interiors. For instance, in this room, we look at your floors, your walls, your ceilings. your lighting, everything in this room at one point has an asset tied to it in our software with the dollar amount, even down to the nice little painting in the background, your lighting, your fire alarm, your fire sprinkler systems, everything has an asset tied to it. And again, your mechanical systems, that's usually the stuff on a roof, or if you have a large mechanical room, whether you have boilers, chillers, coolers, package units, whatever it is. My guys are really good at going through there and telling us what all it is. So this is really hard to read, but should have brought some. So this is what we call the expenditure forecast. So what our software does, and this is for your school district, this is for the entire school district. So we plug all of these numbers, all of these dollar amounts, all these square footages into our software, and it kicks out a what we call an immediate, which is immediate is like, hey, this is broken. You need to fix it right now. The air conditioner's not cooling, the door's not working, whatever it is. And then we do an immediate and a short term, which is 1 to 2 years, and then a near term, which is 3 to 5 years. And that's those first few columns. And we kind of, after talking with Dan and Mike, those kind of things are going to be handled through the operational budget. That's really going to be kind of kept out of the bond issue because it doesn't equate to the dollar value. So when it starts to get to that 7th year and thereon, so 7 to 10 years, if you see those bottom, and again, it's really hard to read, but those bottom two numbers total up to, yeah, it's almost $147 million. So there's a lot of, and this is non-cumulative. So that means if you don't fix those things in the first column, they just roll over into the next column. They're not added up right now. So there's not a whole lot. And I'll tell you, this may look like a lot. You may be thinking, man, that's as far as school district goes, this is right down the median. This is not bad at all. But you do see some costs that start to grow, and especially some of your older schools, the third to fifth year, 6th year, you start to see some of these costs, and that's stuff like, ceiling tiles or grids or some of the infrastructures like electrical seems to be a really bad one that wears out pretty quick. Your plumbing system starts to deteriorate after about that 10-year term. But that's our system expenditure forecast for your district. And this is really simple. It's just, and again, this is for your district, but this is a plan type donut chart. So what this means is it's broken down by trade, or excuse me, by plan type. So safety, of course, is what it is. It's safety. You've got a stair over there with no rail on it. That's pretty, performance integrity means there's something wrong with it. It's not performing the way it should be. Accessibility is what it is. Retrofit means, let's say if we did not have a sprinkler system in this building, we thought you ought to have one, we would call it to retrofit or modernize the building. And then there's life cycle renewal, which is the bulk of this. Life cycle is just, this Ford is supposed to last 15 years. It's here 10 years. It's got 5 years left. Life cycle renewal is going to be the majority of all of your costs on here because you guys don't have a great deal of deficiency in that first couple of years. I know mine was short and sweet. So if you have any questions on our costing or anything, how we came about it, feel free to ask me. We'll do our best to answer.
Ms. Clymer.
I don't have any specific questions. I mean, I think it's pretty self-explanatory what we need to do. I mean, I think that, now the hard part is figuring out how we're going to pay for that. And I don't think your company is really going to unfortunately be able to help us with that. So, but I think this is just the kind of thing that we need for that long-term forecasting to be able to see whether it's through bond funds or other operational funds to say these are funds specifically earmarked for our facilities. While we do have some aging schools, the majority of our schools are, fairly new in comparison to valley-wide schools. And, we take pride in our buildings, and I'm hopeful that we can keep them as nice as they are now for a very long period of time. So thank you for the information.
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Honak.
My question is sort of where's the line between what our facility director's doing and then what you as an outside vendor would be?
Yeah, that is a great question because we hear that a lot of times. So, like Dan is he's focused on the maintenance stuff. He doesn't have the time because we get here, and I think at this school, we may have had 3 people on site, maybe 2. But we start at 7 in the morning, we end at 6 at night or whatever, and we crawl through every inch of this campus. And we just, that's kind of what we do. When you're running the facility, and it's like, if you would, even though they have to send escorts with us, normally it's not the facility director himself, but even taking 2 hours away to kind of try to do your own, and we've had people that try to do it and then they call us back to do it again because it wasn't done right. Because you just can't devote the time and do your other job correctly into what we do, because we're not just walking through here barely looking at it. We're looking at your fire tags. We're looking to make sure everything's inspected. We're looking at, what kind of light bulbs you have in here. We're looking at all of your kitchen equipment. And most of the guys that we send on here have, great, kind of a broad spectrum of expertise on all of that stuff. So it's just easier and more, I think it's more, I won't say it's more knowledgeable because Dan and these guys know their buildings, but we can get to more equipment than they can because we were here for like a week. So hopefully that answers.
Well, it sort of does, but by the nature of it is, I mean, a lot airlines or whatever, a lot of places, I mean, they do progressive inspections. I mean, that's, so it didn't matter. I mean, not gonna have your entire crew come in here every 2 weeks or whatever to see what changes. So that I'm kind of questioning because I own and manage property and progressive is the way you got to do it. I mean, because it's ongoing, and you put it in. So is this something that would be done on an annual basis or would be a start off one time big assessment and then how would that work?
So, to answer that, so that's really up to the district because we have a ton of clients that do us on a rolling basis. Like a lot of colleges do this. So they'll hire us to come out and do these 10 buildings this year, these 10 buildings this year. So we'll do it on a rolling basis. We have some school districts that bring us out every year. City of Phoenix is doing us right now where we're doing all their public works, all their human services. So we're doing sections of their buildings every year. So we've got a contract for the next 6 years, something like that. So I understand what you're saying, but on a larger scale, it's hard for one person or even two people that don't have that dedicated time to come in there and put 8 hours a day for 5 days and just get it done. And it's more than just an assessment. It's also a mechanical inventory. So now you have make, model, and serial number of all your equipment.
Right.
You know where all your equipment is. You have a site plan drawdown. You have a photo log where you can look at photos and you guys have access to our software. So you can we've got tons of different reports, financial reports that you can print out. So it's more than just the assessment. It's kind of the package deal.
So, I mean, I hear what you're saying and it's valid, everything you're saying, but it also seems like it's not either, it's not all or nothing.
Agreed.
It seems like some things really should be, just part of the normal maintenance, you keep logs and stuff like that. So you start having a pretty good record of what your ACs are doing and things like that.
I have no doubt that they have great logs as far as their operational maintenance stuff.
Yeah.
But like our assessment doesn't really talk about changing filters or changing belts or doing the day-to-day operations. Ours is a, this rooftop unit is 15 tons. It's going to cost you $63,000. You're gonna have to rent a crane. You're gonna have to do this. And then at every 25 years, you're gonna have to do this again. So ours is less than an operational and more of a capital planning exercise.
Mhm.
So, and we do, and I'll say it again, we do have clients that hire us year after year after year. A lot of hospitals do that because there's a lot of change in hospitals. There are a lot of mechanical changes. Some people do it every 2 years. Some people just hire us one time and then go on. So.
If I could jump in for a second.
Yeah.
So at this point, we've only hired Mr. Young and the firm for the one assessment in preparations for a potential bond program. At this time, we don't have any plans to have that be an ongoing thing. One of the great things about the analysis that's being done is it is long-term and does look many, many years out into the future. So at this time, we've only procured Mr. Young and the firm to do this one analysis, but I hopefully that
Yeah,
answers.
no, that clears it up because like the whole thing, I didn't really kind of get the context of the whole.
And then as
situation.
far as who would actually be doing the work, right? For the most part, that the construction work would be outsourced to construction companies. That work would be managed by Dan and his team.
Bid out normally.
Yeah. And if we could, just for a second, I just want to add something. If we could go back to the expenditure forecast slide. So as Mr. Young said, that immediate need, it's immediate, right? And so we won't, even if we go out for a bond, just as we were talking about with the new school, we wouldn't have those resources fast enough to address those needs with bond proceeds. And thankfully, because Dan does do such a great job of maintaining our facilities, that's not a astronomical dollar amount. And so that could easily be absorbed by our existing capital funding. It's when you get to the future time periods, that short term, that near term, and that midterm, that, you know, as a reminder, we only receive, again, that $5 million of capital a year. And that doesn't just need to cover facility improvements. It also has to cover curriculum. It also has to cover technology. It also has to cover all those other capital items. And so that's where it, you know, those dollar figures become large enough that we do need to start considering those alternative funding sources. And that's where many school districts end up asking their community for support with a bond program to help address those larger capital planning items that Mr. Young was talking about. Just to try to bring the presentation back to the concept of a bond program.
Thank you. You made it very clear. Thank you, Mr. Vaughn.
Mr. Owens,
Thank you for the presentation.
Ms. Moran.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that I appreciate your expertise. I think this was an excellent presentation, and I definitely see the value of periodically having an outside party provide independent feedback on our facilities and capital needs. I think when you have the same people looking at those, they can see some of the picture, but to have someone else come in and look at that with a pair of fresh eyes is valuable. And I don't know what the ideal time frame in between that would be, but I would like to see more. As a board, we've asked for more information on how are we assessing our maintenance and who is making those decisions. And we know there's an internal committee that makes some of the short-term or immediate probably decisions that are made, but I'm glad to see that we are relying on some outside sources as well.
Yes, thank you. I agree. This is really helpful to us to see the big picture down the road, helping us to plan with funding and what we need to do to make sure that we're taking care of our schools. So thank you very much. Does anybody else, any other questions?
I didn't have a question. I just had a comment, and Amy can probably find it a lot faster than I can. There's a long range facility plan, maintenance plan, et cetera, that we have been presented a few different times. I don't know if it's a normal link in our Friday update. I was just searching really quickly. I can't find it, but I'm sure she will be able to. And I think that probably will answer Board Member Honak some of your questions, because it's a pretty in-depth. I don't remember the last time we got it, and maybe Dan, you know, but all of the ongoing maintenance that's done on a daily, weekly, monthly basis from Dan and his team. Anyway, just if you can send that back out, Amy, to us, or put it in the Friday update this week, because I can't seem to find the link, would at least be able to look at this and see how different it is, to your point, than sort of the regular maintenance and all of that goes on at the district level.
Yeah, right. So, yeah, so Dan's is preventative maintenance and ours is capital planning. So yeah, he'll have that list in there, but ours is just a little bit different than his.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
All right, thanks.
Thank you, Greg.
Yes, thank you so much. And our next presentation will be by Mr. Benales.
Okay, hi. Good evening, Madam President, board members, superintendent, district cabinet, and our LSD family and members joining us online. I'm here to talk about our safety and security initiatives, if we are to be successful in a future bond. Obviously, you all know that safety and security is a huge issue, a huge topic right now nationally. And I think it's very fitting that we've had some presentations today by facilities, demographics, enrollment, because all of those things are affected by school safety. Our enrollment has to do with school safety, facilities, also demographics. All these things are touched by school safety and are affected by school safety. Just like our communities, people are not going to move into communities if they're not safe to move there. Businesses are not going to open in communities if it's high crime. When parents look at school districts and look at schools, they also look at how safe are our schools. So that's definitely one thing I wanted to talk about. We talk about the recent tragic events in some places like Uvalde, also like in Nashville. In 2022, I'm just going to throw some kind of stats at you to kind of get everybody's attention a little bit of how important this topic is. 2022, there was 51 school shootings in the United States. In 2023, thus far, there have been 14 school shootings. And I know we focus on school shootings and those seem to be at the forefront of the national media and the news, but we don't think about those day-to-day things that we deal with in the schools, like disruptive behavior from students, disruptive behavior from parents, contraband, drugs on campus, threats of violence, acts of violence, not including and not having to do with firearms. So there's a lot of things that we have to deal with on a daily basis that don't include that kind of stuff. So I think it was very fitting that we are discussing these topics today because it all ties into to security and safety of our schools. And I would hope that all these conversations, similar to the one that we're going to have this evening about safety and security, are happening across the country in front of school boards, governing boards, school councils, just superintendents. I hope these conversations are happening across the nation right now as we speak because it's very important. So I'm here to talk about our request and our purpose for safety and security initiatives if we are successful in obtaining a bond. Obviously, we're going to look at funding safety and security enhancements to elevate and enhance the safety and security posture of our district. We want to build upon those protective and preventive safety and security measures that we currently have in place. Obviously, the things that we do and everything we do here at the district is we try to keep in line with our strategic plan. And as this is concerned, it has to do with service. It provides an environment where all students, staff, and families feel emotionally and physically safe. Also, it has to do with the people. Foster an environment that creates positive work relationships and promotes health and wellness. So everything that we do, we try to keep in line with our strategic plan. When I look at safety and security of our school district, I look at using a system-based approach as my foundational and our foundational as a district leaders approach to providing safety and security for our districts. And a system in this case refers to a set of elements, measures, procedures that work together as part of a mechanism on interconnected network to produce outcomes, achieve desired results, and avoid undesired results. In this case, our desired results is to create sustainable learning environment for students, staff, and the LESD community. And that is the best practice, and to make sure that we're doing this on a daily basis. By doing so, part of some of the things we're going to be talking about, I'll be mentioning specifically what some of those elements of the system is. But in addition, we also have those cooperative and collaborative relationships with our law enforcement partners, our community partners, our fellow school districts, and providing and getting information as far as how do we provide those safe school environments. We're constantly, and I'm constantly talking with our law enforcement partners, how we can do things better. How can we be better partners with you to ensure that we have safe responses to our schools? How can we be more efficient in gathering the details and facts to conduct better and more thorough investigations so we can provide to law enforcement to have better follow-up? One of the things that we've done here at the school district, as you guys well know, is the creation of the West Valley School Safety Consortium and having our safety. So we had a summit back in February, which was highly successful. I think we had upwards of 200 attendees. In addition, we also have a meeting tomorrow, our first consortium meeting in the West Valley School Safety Consortium, which we have, I think, approximately 50 to 60 attendees coming tomorrow to discuss some of these safety trends and best practices that we can partner together and provide safety to the Litchfield School District. In addition, I also attended a school safety summit for the last couple of days. So we're constantly looking at these things and how we can better serve our district and improve on these security measures. Some of the specific systems we're going to talk about is physical security and environmental design. And I'll touch on more on that a little more specifically in a few minutes. But that includes like vestibules for front offices, improvements based on physical security assessments that we receive from our law enforcement partners that have done physical security assessments of our campuses. We're going to look at electronic surveillance in the form of surveillance cameras. Also, we're looking at crisis notification systems, which are emergency notifications that we can immediately notify our school campuses and communities that we have, for instance, a lockdown or we have an emergency on a campus. And my goal with that is to ensure that we have 100% coverage on a campus. There should never be an incident where something happens on campus where only half the campus knows about it because of our inability to communicate or our lack of resources to ensure that everybody on campus knows what is going on, to make sure that we get everybody locked down or we employ or deploy our emergency protocols right away. We're going to look at, included in that crisis notification system is some data collection, which will help us manage drills, keep information on those drills, manage incidents, keep data on the incidents that we have on campuses. And also, it is like we talked about, an early warning device as well. It also enables visitor and guest management, which will help us keep more control of who's visiting our campus and keep those who are not are restricted from visiting campuses. And also lastly in the systems is tactics and training to better equip our school staff and our students and give them resources to better respond to school emergencies. I believe we did have a picture up there a second ago for our physical security, and this is a picture of a vestibule at a school, and this is kind of like the front lobby. And this what this does it's just that layer of protection. And I heard a good analogy before about when we look at school safety, we do it in layers. It's kind of like stacking Swiss cheese that has holes in it. The more we stack, the more holes that we fill and we cover up. So these vestibules have controlled access. They protect staff and they also protect students. And it's that barrier and an additional layer of protection for people that are visiting our schools, who are working inside our schools and are attending school. And it's also a deterrent. It's also a deterrent to that those who may want to do harm to our students or staff, that they know that the word gets out that we do have those vestibules in there. So those are things that we're looking at. Another thing we're looking at physical security wise is ballistic window film. For some of those areas that we have a lot of glass, and if you've been to some of our campuses, some of those doors do have a lot of glass or walkways. And we're also looking at ballistic window film that is gives us protection against firearms, also gives us protection against blunt force. And that's just another barrier and layer of protection that we can use, kind of when I use that analogy of the Swiss cheese. We keep adding those layers of protection, and it's going to further secure our schools. There is no one magic answer and magic resource that's going to make our schools totally safe. So we have to constantly be thinking outside the box, using the resources we have to improve upon those systems that we do have. In addition, we're looking at surveillance cameras. While this may not stop an attack on a school or school violence, it will be an early warning system if we set it up correctly and we have the cameras and surveilling those areas that we need to. So for instance, if we have office staff that have cameras and vision who can see outside of the school and they can see an incoming threat that we can initiate through a crisis notification system or early warning system, we can go into a lockdown if we do see a threat. And, that's something that can also be used by law enforcement. If we do have that capability, we can have some interoperability with our law enforcement partners where they can use their dispatch to live stream those videos to our responding units. That's also a great resource. Not only is it a great resource during an event for first responders, but also after the event. Because we have to properly investigate these incidents and do after action reports to ensure that, hey, the things that we could have done better, that we'll be able to see through these surveillance cameras where there might have been some failures and we can do better. Here's some stats from a Secret Service report on school violence in 2019. It's kind of speak to some of these initiatives that I'm talking about. no profile on student attacker or type of school. There is no perfect profile on a student attacker or type of school. That creates a problem because how do we protect if we don't know exactly where the threat's coming from? So that's where we start doing our layers of protection to try to protect the best we can. Most attacks were firearms were used. Approximately 61% of firearms were used, and the other 39% was bladed weapons. The report also shows that multidisciplinary threat assessments are very critical in identifying where some of these threats may be coming from. And those have proved, and we do those threats on our campuses, and we do threat assessments, and those have aided us greatly in trying to identify concerns on campus or with students, where we need to put safety plans in place and take proactive action to maybe prevent future violence. 68% of schools have lockdown procedures. And thankfully we do. I'm concerned about those 32% of schools that do not have lockdown procedures. I'm curious as to what are they doing, but I'm happy to say that we do have lockdown procedures in place. 30% of schools have security cameras. That's only 3 out of 10 schools that have security cameras, which I believe should be a lot higher than that. So it's sad to say that that number is so low, but I am sure that superintendents, the governing board, student council, or school board councils, and everybody are looking at those numbers and trying to make those steps to improve that number. 17% have alert systems. So that's how maybe 2 out of 10 schools only have alert systems, which is not very good. 7% have metal detectors. 24% of attacks happen before the school day, and 51% of the attacks during morning classroom hours. So our safety and security strategic objectives are, these initiatives is to harden campuses through physical security enhancements and environmental design. And we've talked about those: vestibules, ballistic window film, improve surveillance capabilities by use of cameras, electronic surveillance, and natural surveillance. When I mean natural surveillance is looking at environmental design and setting up those vestibules, setting up those front offices where they have windows and they can see out the windows and they can see threats as they're approaching the campus. What I don't like to see is I walk into a front lobby and I see the staff and their backs are turned to the front door. And there's been a couple of recommendations I've made where they adjust their desks and stuff like that to where they can see the door and see out the windows. And that's just little things that we can do. There was no cost to that. That's just more environmental design. And how do we do that? That may mean that we have to trim a couple trees where they can see a little better out the windows, but those are little things that we can do to improve our security and safety posture. Deploy a reliable and other measures, deploy a reliable and efficient crisis notification system. We've talked about that. We're looking at some great products out there where we can deploy those throughout the campuses, where everybody would have the ability to initiate a lockdown or emergency procedure, coupled with proper lighting and strobe lights and things around the campus where we would have 100% coverage. And also the ability to screen and manage visitors with the visitor management system, and knowing who's on our campus and keeping those and restricting those who don't need to be on our campus. Sometimes people have restraining orders, are registered sex offenders, and they don't need to be on our campuses. And hopefully we can have real-time information and data that when they're checking in at school campus, so we can identify those people and restrict access. Some of the best practices that are put out by the Department of Homeland Security. One of the recommendations is mass notification systems. The goal of these systems is to broadcast information rapidly to facilitate appropriate response and action to students, faculty, staff, visitors, first responders, families, and the public. And that is straight from the Department of Homeland Security. Another best practice recommendation is a visitor management system, and we've talked about that. And lastly was closed circuit video, which can be used to monitor an evolving situation, track a suspected shooter, and it can also be used as a forensic and evidence collection tool. All these initiatives obviously are going to take some time and obviously resources to make sure these things are put in place effectively and efficiently. that are going to serve our district well and keep our students and staff safe. Some of the strategic timelines that we're looking at, and obviously this is going to be very dependent on whether, we are successful in partnering with our school community to get a bond passed. But we're looking at for crisis notification, all these systems, school office vestibules, ballistic window film, and surveillance cameras, starting in fiscal year 24-25, all the way through fiscal year 2027. So with that, I mean, I know we all understand the importance of it. It's just good to see that, we've identified some of our priorities and where we'd like to move in the event that we have the resources to do so. And so with that, if you have any questions, I'm open to any questions that you may have.
Ms. Clymer.
I don't have any specific questions at this time. Thank you. I mean, you've put a lot of time and effort into this since you've been here, and there's been some pretty significant changes already. So I think there's only, further we can go with some additional resources and money to do these things. My question is, I will reserve it for later because it's not something that we need to get into tonight, but in terms of your strategic timeline, I'd love to know, when we are successful with the bond and you have all of these things available, how did you align this timeline in terms of the priorities and what comes first and what doesn't? Again, not for this evening, but in the future, as we get closer to that, I'd love to know more about priorities and how you made those decisions and how we'll do that district-wide. But for now, very good work. Thank you.
Mr. Honak.
Thank you. Very good presentation. Is really important. The thing that got me was the timeline and electronic surveillance, like way out there. I mean, everybody's got a Ring doorbell. Everybody's got, gets an alert on their phone, or, most people do. Wi-Fi cameras are $40, that you stick a memory card in, and I always think that, sometimes you just, it's a big institution. You got to go do everything official. But I mean, you're just talking about the office staff sitting there, having a couple of screens and a Wi-Fi feed on them with, 2-3 cameras, of different directions, just because natural surveillance is a huge thing. But you can have natural surveillance through video too. So, people working in office and they see patterns and stuff, and all of a sudden they see something that doesn't fit the pattern, and they a little bit. So that's just my take on, a few people could just sort of donate, to hook up, and I don't know what the downside of that is too. I mean, it's limited to how many people it could go to and stuff like that. You can't rapidly send that feed off to everybody in the universe with a cheap system, but isn't there a place for that? I mean, it doesn't seem like we need a bond to scratch up a few bucks,
Yeah, there's obviously a lot of challenges in going to a system like that, especially around a district that our size with 16 schools. So we have to consider, is it effective? Is it efficient? Is it sustainable? Is it a system that we can deploy district-wide that's going to be, that we can work with throughout the schools? We want to remain consistent. We want to have some congruency throughout the district, instead of having maybe 2 schools start with this, maybe another 2 schools start with that. And so I think, obviously having a district-wide approach is going to cost, is going to be a significant cost. To ensure also we have 4 law enforcement agencies. When we look at interoperability with their systems, we have 4 different law enforcement agencies that serve our community. I think maybe even a 5th at times. So we have to also look at those considerations and interoperability, that we find systems that we can integrate with them as well.
But my concern is, I agree with everything you're saying, but my problem is we have nothing 0.0 until 2027. That, so even if we didn't, if we had a simple system that just office staff saw out of the corner of their eye for 16 schools, that's not a huge amount of money. And it sounds like having something for 3 years instead of nothing until we have the wonderful system that, connects everybody. What if we're not going to feel great if something, God forbid, something happened?
Oh, those are
In the
definitely
next 3
conversations.
years.
Those are definitely conversations I'm willing to have.
Yeah.
And that's something I'll be working with obviously our superintendent and executive directors on narrowing those timelines if we are successful.
Thank you.
Mr. Owens,
No, thanks. No questions. Thank you.
Sure.
Ms. Moran.
Yes, I have some feedback on one specific piece. I think these are great advancements and I appreciate the work that you've already done. I know I've noticed some changes in my time on campus already this year, and more consistency with, classroom doors being locked, things like that happened more often on certain campuses, but I'm seeing that more often across all of our campuses. So I know that your work has been impactful already, and I look forward to it continuing to be, in fact, impactful. But my question or feedback is actually on the mass notification system. So the crisis notification system. As a board, we've been asking for consistent notifications to the exact parties that you're saying here: students, faculty, staff, visitors, families, and the public. Not first responders specifically, but all of the other parties that you've mentioned here. So I just would like to provide the feedback that although I understand that your Director Bernales, your priority here is a crisis notification, I think it would be ideal to get a notification system that could be used for more than just crises, that could be used for calendar reminders, that could be used for some of these really basic things that we've seemed to have had a hard time getting consistently done through straight up text messaging from our office managers and staff. So I think the notification system is much needed in more areas than just crisis, although I think we could play double, triple, quadruple duty on utilizing that notification system to be consistent with our messaging on numerous fronts.
No, I definitely agree. I didn't get into specifics about what that crisis notification program or system is. The one we are considering and looking at is specific to emergency notifications and lockdowns. And emergencies on campus, whether it be a medical emergency all the way up to, an active shooter. And I understand what you're saying as well. And those are great topics for discussion for our communications director and I and the rest of the cabinet and how do we better notify all our school communities about all those things that you discussed.
Yeah, I'm just concerned. I guess my concern is that we would spend money on something specific to crisis notification. And maybe there are factors that I'm not aware of that this would need to be specific to that. But I just think that we would be able to set a broader net and solve more than just this crisis notification system problem, because I wouldn't want us to spend money on one system and then have to buy another system and then have to buy a third system. It seems like there would be a way to get one system potentially that would fill all of these needs. So hopefully that can be part of the conversation going forward with solving this problem that we have with our communication.
So if I could help respond to that as well. So we are presently looking at and working towards a broader communication system, but this crisis communication system has unique capabilities where, as an example, as an employee, I would be wearing a wearable badge, and I would be able to alert my site administration by pressing a button, or if I press it enough times, immediately putting the school in lockdown without having to talk to several different people to get that process started. So this crisis notification system is more about speed of implementing our safety procedures. It would also, so along with those badges, then it comes with strobes, if you will, that would be in all classrooms and all across campus. So as soon as a lockdown was being called, people would have a visual cue, as well as It's designed to take over the intercom system and start alerting people physically on campus that there is a lockdown. But we are presently in tandem working with our director of communications and some outside vendors on working towards a more robust mass communication system that I think better aligns with what you're referring to.
Excellent. Thank you for the clarification, and I look forward to hearing more about both of those potential systems.
Did Mr. Nuanez have something to say? Just curious. No, okay, never mind. Was there any more questions, Ms. Moran?
Nope, that's it for me. Thank you.
Okay, I don't have any questions. Thank you very much for putting together this presentation for us. I agree with the rest of the board members in that we have seen changes already. And I appreciate us having you. I mean, at this time, I think it makes our community feel safer knowing we have you here to help us and knowing what we might need to do to make this a safer school. I think we already have pretty safe schools, but you're making sure that we're even more safe for them. I did want to point out one thing, Mr. Honak, when he talked about the cheaper systems or whatever, is that, correct me if I'm wrong, but we have certain laws we have to apply, like we have to follow regarding video recording stuff, things like that, and that those cheaper systems may not necessarily meet those legal requirements that we have as a school district. Am I correct?
Yeah, that's correct. There's going to be a lot of considerations that come into putting a school surveillance system in, where they'll be capturing the video with minors and students, and where there'll be collection and even storage of that stuff, those videos. So there's a lot of considerations that go into that. And I think the biggest consideration is that we have something that's consistent district-wide in the interest of equity across the campus as well, across the district as well.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate your presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You guys have anything else for us, or is that all our presentations?
That's all our presentations. So tonight we just to recap, we talked about what a bond looks like, and we went through most of the categories of what we would propose as a $100 million bond program. We talked about the need for a new school. The $100 million bond program would put $48 million to that. We talked about the need for facility renovations to our existing schools. And it would be 40 million for that. The safety items that we talked about tonight are about 7 million. And rounding out that 100 million would be the 5 million of technology and transportation items that we're hoping to have a presentation for you May 9th. On May 9th, we'll also hear from the polling firm to be able to gauge if it's worthwhile to call for an election. Obviously, we want to be good stewards of resources, and calling elections are not free. And so that the results of that poll will help us, even though we have the need, right? We talked about that tonight. We want to make sure that we stand a good chance of actually passing the bond if we're going to call for it. So that presentation will help us gauge that. And then the board will have the opportunity to discuss and potentially call for the bond election next time we meet May 9th.
I had a
One
quick
question,
question.
if you don't mind. You may have said it earlier in your sort of intro, but I'm not sure if I missed it. Please just reiterate it here. The $48 million for new school, that allocation within the bond, roughly, not specifically, but roughly break down what is in that $48 million number.
So that is our best estimate of what it would take to build one of our existing schools and floor plans today. It obviously, in the past, when we built those schools, did not cost that, but with the inflation that we've seen with construction costs, which we've gotten a pretty good look at through the construction of the White Tanks Learning Center, that is our estimate for building one of our larger footprint schools at one of the 3 existing locations. So that's to a certain extent, assuming that we won't need to buy a piece of land, that we'll find suitable one of those 3 sites, and that we will build a school similar to our existing facilities.
Okay. I'd like to hear more about that, not tonight, but
Yeah.
as we move into this, my memory is terrible, but I want to say that, Belen Soto, I think $16 or $18 million. Is that roughly about right? Dan's shaking his head in the back. I mean, I live in the same economy that everybody else does, but 3.5 times the school, I mean, that's more than they paid for the last high school. So yeah, I'd like to know more information about that as we move forward. Not saying that's not true. I'm just saying that's a shock to me. And I think that's going to be a shock to a lot of people in this community, that we're going to pay more for an elementary school than we just paid for our last high school. So just getting really clear about what that's going to go to. I mean, it's worth it. We clearly need it. We heard all the presentations today. We need to be really clear about communicating how that's going to be spent and what that's going to do, because 3.5 times the amount in just a few short years is pretty significant. So thank you for the information.
Thank you.
I would point out that we just spent like 3 or 4 times the amount we expected to spend, I think, on white tanks, right? So we know that that is the case for building right now. And we have an example, right, that we just did. So
The other thing.
Yeah,
to-
but I mean,
sorry.
scale is a little different. I
Yeah.
mean, white tanks, spending 3 times the amount at white tanks is a little different than 3 times the amount at $48 million. So I get it. I mean, the concept is the same, but the numbers just get exponentially larger at that amount. So again, not a conversation for this evening, but would love to know more as we dig in further to that opportunity.
okay. If you need nothing else from us, then I can have a motion to,
I move to adjourn the meeting.
I will second that.
okay, having a first and a second. Ms. Clymer, how do you vote?
Yay.
Mr. Honak,
Yay.
Mr. Owens,
Yay.
Ms. Moran.
Yay.
I'm a yay. This meeting is adjourned.